It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, everybody. I am Jeff Arbuckle, and this is Monster Mondays presented to you by Film Seizure. If you've seen the movie Donnie Darko, you might remember a particular line spoken by Drew Barrymore's character in which he talks about a famous linguist once saying that of all the phrases in the English language and all the combinations of words in all of history, that cellar door is the most beautiful. Well, what lies behind the cellar door in this week's movie? Maybe not quite so beautiful. I'm talking about The Beast in the Cellar from 1970. Now, this was produced by Tygon British Film Productions, and it's one of many British film studios that was really trying to get in on the horror craze in England, in particular in the wake of Hammer and Amicus. And they mostly produced horror movies, with a few exceptions, like 1971's Black Beauty, which is obviously a kids movie, or a family movie, I should say. 1969's Zeta 1, which is kind of a science fiction comedy that's kind of in the vein of Barbarella, kind of like the Space Babes kind of idea. And then you have 1972's Au Pair Girls, which I think was kind of a softcore porn comedy. But eventually they moved into distribution instead of production, where they got into a lot more of exploitation and really just kind of chasing various trends in movies. In particular, like they made a spy movie. They made lots of sex comedies. They would distribute, or I should say distribute, not made, but they distributed some horror movies in the later 70s. But The Beast in the Cellar, which was 1970, this kind of comes towards the end of their heavy production days. This movie stars two exceptional British actresses, Beryl Reid and Flora Robson. Now, both of these actresses are extremely well known in British stage and in some film. Beryl Reid was granted the status of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire for public service. She was an award-winning stage actress going into this movie. Just 3 years before, she had won, I think, a Tony Award. Flora Robson, on the other hand, was given the title of Dame in 1960, so she was a couple of steps above the whatever you would call that status that Beryl Reid had. But Robson was nominated for Best Supporting Actress in 1945 for Saratoga Trunk, which most of the time I can at least say I've heard of a lot of movies that were nominated for Oscars, even older movies like that one. I can say without a doubt I've never heard of the movie Saratoga Trunk until I saw it when I was doing my research for this. But so let's get into the movie here, because there's a lot to talk about with this movie. It's a very, very interesting, almost more of a drama as opposed to a horror movie. So we begin with the soldiers that are stationed out in the rural areas of England. One guy's Land Rover breaks down on the moors, which we talked about the moors not too long ago with American Werewolf in London, but he ends up getting attacked and mauled before being picked up by the person he radioed out to. So the authorities are kind of brought out to try to piece together exactly what happened, who or what might have attacked this person, because it's not something that you would normally expect a human being to be able to do with their bare hands. So then we meet the Ballantyne sisters, who are Reid and Robson. Joyce is played by Flora Robson, and Ellie, who is Beryl Reid. And they kind of bicker back and forth with one another. They like to they're two very different personalities, whereas Joyce is very straight-laced, and she's kind of the stiff upper lip British type of person who's kind of in control of this household. Ellie seems to be innocent, maybe a little more simple, but at the same time tries to be as happy as she possibly can all the time. One of the things that's often said is that she always is thinking back to a time like 50 years in the past, before their father, before his mental health declined. And she always is remembering those nostalgic times, whereas Joyce is always trying to stay in the present and pushing forward, basically. And they're two very different personalities, one much stronger and much more dominant than the other. They are also told about the murder that occurred, and they're a little weirded out by this, because it's like, well, they're told by a visitor that they often get, somebody who runs a lot of errands for them that is stationed at the base up there where they live, by the name, his name is Alan. And Alan is this handsome young gentleman who, Ellie kind of almost thinks of him like a nephew or a son almost. She kind of dotes on him a little bit. He explains how, he's got an inside track on what's going on, because he is the driver for the pathologist that's looking into the murders. And it seems as though the type of ferocity and the wounds kind of come across almost like a cheetah or some sort of jaguar or something like this, some sort of large cat, because whatever it is that has mauled this person appears to either have talons or very sharp claws. So then we do see that another attack has occurred where a young man is killed, but a woman that the young man was kind of in a barn, looking to get some action with, she was left alone, but she's in shock. That same night, closer to where the Ballantines live, the Ballantine sisters, a man on a bicycle is attacked and killed as well. Now, we begin to start to suspect that the Ballantine sisters know exactly who is doing all of the killing. And sure enough, they're checking the cellar, saying, well, he can't possibly have gotten out. Only to find out that whoever this person is certainly seems to have dug his way out and tunneled his way out through the floor of the cellar and out into a barn or a stable or something that's on their property. That same night that they find out that whoever this is that they keep an eye on in the cellar, that he has tunneled out, Joyce falls and hurts herself. And so she's kind of left bedridden. And this leaves Ellie very ill-equipped to kind of run the house. She begins to get very nervous around the fact that it's only going to be a matter of time before the police or the army realize that, yes, these two kindly old women definitely know who's been killing these people, particularly these army people, which surely is not going to go over very well. Well, realizing that there's really not much more that she can do, and realizing that even the nurse who has come to take care of Joyce is getting a little bit too close. And, even when she suggests that maybe the sisters should move closer to town, downsize and everything, Ellie kind of flips out on her a little bit and basically states that, well, they just absolutely cannot do that. So this ends up really kind of, Ellie's mental state is not strong enough to deal with keeping the secret, whatever the secret is. So she decides that the only thing she can do is call the police and the army and explain to them what she can. And this is where the movie takes an interesting turn, because this whole time we assume that either they have some sort of large animal in the cellar, or that they have some sort of actual monster in their cellar. We find out that the monster of this movie isn't exactly what we think it is. When the police come, Ellie is explaining the history of their family, and she talks for hours, and it's actually kind of a funny little edit because it kind of crossfades from her starting to tell this story that starts back with 1914 when her father went off to war, and it crossfades, and you can tell that the superintendent that is investigating everything is starting to get really frustrated, and it's also getting dark outside. But Ellie tells the story in this very long and detailed story about how her father had gone off to World War I, and he came home for his first basically for his first leave, and he's still in very high spirits. And they went to the fair, and they took a ride on the fair, or on the merry-go-round, and everything seems to be so great and wonderful. And Ellie always thought that her father was the most handsome man in the world, and she always felt so proud to walk alongside him because he would be somebody who could turn heads, and she just felt very honored to be in his presence. He went. Once he took off again, he was eventually stationed in France on the front line, and it soon discovered that he was gassed, which I think disfigured him, and it really kind of started to split the family up. And he also came when the war was finally over and he came home. He was, at this point in time, just broken. He was shell-shocked. He was dealing with the side effects of being gassed, which was a terrible, terrible thing that happened in World War I. And he was a different person. He was not in the same high spirits. He would abuse their mother and the two sisters. And in the early 1920s, they suddenly find out that their mother was pregnant with a son who she would eventually call Stephen. And their father didn't want anything to do with that. He didn't want to be a father to this kid. And he was essentially sent off to boarding school. Now, whether or not this had something to do with maybe their mother was, cheating on their father, it's not really implied, but you have to kind of question these sorts of things. But eventually, their father's state of mind was decreasing, and his health was kind of going down the tubes. And by the time that he passed away in 1933, it was becoming this sort of situation where Joyce was becoming more and more hardened and more was given more and more strength. So she ended up bringing Stephen home from boarding school because she figured, well, we need to have a man around the house. But as World War II kept getting closer and closer and closer, and Stephen wanting more and more and more to go off to war, Joyce was becoming more and more dead set in preventing him to do that. Well, one thing that Joyce decided to do to keep Stephen out of the military was to kind of finish something that their father had started to do before he was sent off to boarding school. And that is to basically wall him up inside the cellar. And that's where he stayed for over 30 years. And he became feral, basically. And he was the one who pretty much because he was caged like an animal, he began thinking like an animal. He began acting like an animal. And the various things that he would eat, the various things that they would give him, was he was eating and acting like an animal. So once he got out, he began attacking specifically army people. Now, why was that? Well, what we end up finding out is that once he returns home, you think that he's come back to kill Joyce for keeping him in the cellar for most of his life. He lunges for her, and one of the army people that's kind of guarding their house shoots Stephen, and that's when we find out that he was actually going to attack and destroy a picture of their father. That he was now basically essentially only targeting people in uniform because of the way that his father was and the way that Joyce would keep him out of the military. Had basically driven him insane to where basically any soldier was now his enemy. And that's the movie. Turns out that our monster isn't at all a monster. And in fact, it's how war affects people, not just the people who are combatants, but also people who are the family members of those combatants. War turns out to be our monster in The Beast in the Cellar. So let me get to my 3 likes here real quick before we close things up. First and foremost, Stephen's story is the way that it's told by Beryl Reid in this is really fascinating. It becomes a very fascinating story that she's telling about her family. It's not something that is it really kind of makes you realize that, you know, maybe some of these people that, you know, lived through 2 world wars in Europe were, you know, greatly affected by the way things were politically and socially at that time. And it's just, yes, there is a funny edit there where the superintendent is clearly like frustrated with her telling this entirely super long, overwrought story about her family life, but it really helps paint a picture. Next, I specifically like the setting of this. It's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. It's on the moors, which is always kind of a fascinating place to set your movie because it is very simultaneously almost like completely and totally empty and devoid of civilization, but it's also very idyllic, and it's also very kind of scary and kind of spooky. So, you know, the setting, it also kind of, I kept getting these vibes from like classic Doctor Who, where you had particularly the third Doctor, my favorite Doctor's era, where you had like this military base out in the middle of nowhere, and you had a monster stalking the area. It just, the pacing, the scenes, or the setting, I should say, all of that really reminded me of this of a classic Doctor Who story, and I for one am always for that. And this movie would have come out around the time that John Pertwee would have been taking over and would have been stuck on Earth and working with UNIT, which was a military outfit. So it all kind of gives me these kind of warm fuzzy feelings of that era of Doctor Who. Lastly, this movie would be nothing without Beryl Reid and Flora Robson. Beryl Reid ends up becoming the clear-cut lead in this, but the two of these kind of powerhouse actresses, particularly how you see them interact with one another, and in how Joyce kind of gets lost in that at the end, when she's kind of getting loopy on her medicine, the doctor not realizing the things that he's prescribing her will act differently for her because she ends up giving the medicine she gets to Stephen. And so she ends up basically not being there. She's too loopy to really function like she used to be, and it starts to kind of unravel. But these two actresses are extremely good in this, and it is definitely something that I know this movie did not get particularly great reviews because it's almost sold as this monster movie with no monster in it. But at the same time, I think that these two actresses have always garnered praise for how they've played their parts. In fact, most people even elevate this movie to a more positive review because of the two actresses, and it's certainly clear why. They're very, very good in this. So that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. Don't forget to check out new episodes of Film Seizure each and every Wednesday morning, and you can get new installments of Monster Mondays each Monday afternoon on filmseizure.com, as well as places where you can find podcasts like SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Audible. Search for us wherever you like to listen to your podcast. There's a good chance you'll find us. Additionally, you can hop on over to Facebook and Twitter to follow us by just searching for Film Seizure. And while you're at it, you can also head over to my website, bmovieenema.com, and read a brand new text review each and every Friday morning. You can also follow B-Movie Enema on Facebook and Twitter by searching for just that, B-Movie Enema. And while you're at it, go on over to YouTube. B-Movie Enema has a channel there that you can subscribe to. You can find episodes of my B-Movie Enema, the series, which is me hosting a movie. All 13, or actually most of 13 of the 13 first season episodes are found there. You can also find them all on the website bmovieenema.com. Season number 2 is coming this September, so go over there, subscribe, and get ready for that. So until next week, everybody, stay spooky.